Welcome back to FoodCrafts. Now, I'm not a baker and I definitely don't make baked goods regularly, but I tried my hand at making French croissants from scratch for the first time ever and was very successful. So today, I'm going to show you my first time making croissants and also give you the same tips and recipe that I used so that if it's your first time making croissants, you can be as successful as I was. I'm going to be using a few helpful tips that I learned from some other croissant videos, so big shout out to these content creators who made some really good croissants. So, like all the other croissant recipes, we're going to start by making our croissant dough. Now, I don't own a stand mixer, so if things weren't already challenging enough, I made these croissants with hand-kneaded dough. Let's start by adding 4 grams of active dry yeast into 80 grams of warm water, which should be about 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Whisk that together and let that sit for about 10 minutes or until you see bubbles on the top of the yeasty water mixture. That'll tell you that your yeast is working and ready to go. While our yeast is blooming, in a large mixing bowl, add 250 grams of all-purpose flour, 20 grams of sugar, and 5 grams of salt. Whisk your dry ingredients together before we add our wet ingredients. Once evenly combined, we're going to add our yeast and water mixture along with 80 grams of whole milk and 20 grams of gently melted butter. It's time to ditch the whisk and use our hands to combine our dry and wet ingredients. And once there is no more dry flour remaining, lightly dust your counter with flour and dump your fresh dough onto your kitchen surface. We're going to knead our dough for about 10 minutes or until we've determined that our dough has developed a sufficient amount of gluten. An underdeveloped dough is going to want to tear and break when you stretch a piece off of it, whereas a gluten-developed dough is going to be elastic and stretch without tearing. Our dough right now is going to need a little bit more kneading and more gluten development. Another way to check for gluten development is the window pane effect. Stretch your dough outwards and check to see how thin your dough can get without tearing. If you're not seeing this yet, don't give up and just keep kneading. Once we've successfully passed the window pane test and the stretch test, shape your dough by tucking the sides underneath it until the top of the dough looks smooth and pretty, like so. Next, we're going to place our dough back in the mixing bowl that I was just in. Our dough is going to rest in the fridge for about 30 to 45 minutes, and while that's happening, we're going to get our butter ready. Before we start working on our butter, we need to talk about a critically important detail when it comes to making croissants, and that's your choice of butter. All great croissant recipes and videos talk about how important choosing the right butter is, but what exactly are we looking for in a good croissant butter? Well, a good butter for croissants should be at least 82% butterfat, which ironically is the butterfat percentage of this Kerrygold European style butter I have here. Most American brand butters like Land O'Lakes is going to have about 80% butterfat, which isn't going to cut it. Additionally, the reason why higher butterfat percentage is better is because it's more pliable and better able to withstand the folding and layering process when making croissant dough. Our chances of success are a little bit better just by the choice of our ingredients. Now, while I've been talking, I've taken out 2 sheets of parchment paper and a pencil to trace out a 6 by 6 inch square that's eventually going to be the mold for our butter. Take your butter of choice out of the fridge to let the temperature come up. We need the butter to be cold throughout this entire process, but not too cold to where it's prone to cracking and breaking. Once your butter is pliable like this, but isn't too soft and mushy, you're ready to form your butter square. We're going to need about 50 grams of Kerrygold butter, so weigh that out and place it inside your 6 by 6 inch square. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it should be relatively flat so it's easier to roll out to its final shape. Once our butter is assembled, place the second piece of parchment paper over the butter and fold the parchment at the lines we've pre-drawn so we have a nice parchment square. From there, it's time to meet your new best friend, the rolling pin. Now let your rolling pin get to know your butter block by smacking it a couple times. I'm mostly joking, but this is also a very important technique when it comes to making croissants. Smacking your croissant dough during the lamination process is much better than flattening and trying to roll it out, especially for a beginner. When rolling out croissant dough, too much downward pressure can cause your butter layers to separate. So you might as well practice this now because we're going to be doing it a lot later on. So once you flatten your butter into the 6 by 6 square, go ahead and place that in the fridge to cool down. And in the meantime, take out your croissant dough because we're going to roll it out into a 6 by 9 inch rectangle. Try your best to keep it as rectangular as possible while rolling it out. The more uneven it is, the higher chance that some of the layers are not going to have butter in it. Also, it's better if your dough is slightly larger than your butter square, as we can just cut off the edges that don't have butter in them. We're going to copy Brian's method on the first fold of the lamination process, which is sort of a hack to create 2 layers of butter without additional rolling and folding. To do this, place your 6 by 6 inch butter square on the lower 2/3 of your dough, making sure that your butter is not too cold and has time to get to its pliable state. Then take the last third of your croissant dough and fold it over the middle third of your croissant dough. Finally, take the third of the croissant dough with the butter on it and fold it towards the middle as well. And voila, you have 2 layers of butter with minimal effort. At this point, if you think your dough is getting warm or it's starting to snap back, wrap it in plastic wrap and place it in the fridge for about 30 minutes. This will cool down your butter and dough, but also let the gluten relax. So after about 30 minutes or so, we're back in business. And it's time to do our second and final fold. Now remember what I said about smacking instead of rolling? This is where that comes into play. Start the flattening process by first smacking your dough a couple times until it's about halfway to the dimensions that we need it to be, which is about a 10 by 12 inch rectangle. It doesn't have to be exact. What's important is the thickness of your dough. It should be about half an inch thick. Halfway through the process, switch from smacking to rolling and remember not to apply too much downward pressure. You should focus on rolling the pin outwards. Once your dough is about half an inch thick, we're ready to perform our second and final fold, which is going to be the book fold. To do that, we're going to take one end of our croissant dough and fold the edge until it meets the middle of the dough. Then fold the other end to the middle as well, like so. From there, we're going to fold one end of our croissant dough until it meets the other end. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what is called a book fold. At this point, we're going to wrap our croissant dough back in the plastic wrap and leave it in the fridge overnight. This will allow the dough to rest and ferment until we're ready to form our croissants. It's a new day and I want to have freshly baked croissants with my morning coffee, even though it's going to be about noon by the time we're done. Anyway, let's take our dough out of the fridge and let it come to temperature for about 20 minutes or so. Once the dough feels cold but pliable, we're going to once again smack down our dough to flatten it. After several minutes, we're going to roll it out the rest of the way. We want our dough to at least be half an inch thick and at least a 12 by 10 inch rectangle. With the amount of croissant dough that we've made here, we're going to get about 5 to 6 croissants depending on how much excess dough we cut out during the lamination process. Once your dough is to size, cut the ends to make a clean rectangle. From there, we're going to make markings every 4 inches, so you should have 3 marks. On the opposite side of our laminated dough, make your first mark at 2 inches and then 4 inches after that. These will act as guides to make perfect triangles for uniform croissants. You can use a pizza cutter, but I'm going to use my chef's knife to connect the markings to form triangles. Inevitably, you're going to have some excess pieces, and I didn't want to waste this laminated dough that I worked so hard on, so I'm going to make 2 mini croissants with the excess that I had. As far as the rolling process goes, make sure that there is no excess flour on the side that you're rolling into. When rolling your croissant dough, you want to make sure you're using gentle pressure while keeping the rolls tight. Too much pressure resulting in a tight roll could result in your croissant tearing during the proofing stage. Just take it slow and make sure that your croissant is even all the way down. Also, make sure the tip of your croissant sits at the bottom during the proofing stage. Otherwise, your rolls could unravel, ruining everything. While we're rolling our croissants, if you're enjoying this cooking challenge style of content, could you please give the video a like? You can also drop a comment down below letting me know your thoughts. And lastly, if you like the content and you want to see more, why not hit that subscribe button? I really appreciate all the support I've gotten so far. I know I'm a small channel, so this really means a lot. Thanks again. So after rolling, it's time to proof. And there are several methods to proof your croissants, but the most interesting method that I've found is by placing a boiling pot of water in the oven and letting your croissants proof in the oven. This method keeps the croissants moist and prevents them from drying out. But if the oven gets too hot, you risk melting your butter layers. So if you're going to use this method to proof, wait at least 10 minutes before putting your croissants in the oven. And if you need to cool down your oven, just leave the door open for a little bit. Our croissants have been proofing for an hour and a half now, so it's time to test them and see if they're ready for the oven. There are 2 things we can do to see if our croissants have proofed. One is the jiggle test. Shake your sheet pan. If you see your croissants jiggle, this is a good sign that your croissants have fully proofed. And 2 is the eye test. Pretty basic, but check to see if your croissants have grown at least 1.5 times its size. And if you noticed, one of my croissants actually got too hot during the proofing stage and some of the butter melted. I was a little bit worried, but you'll see how they turned out. And finally, the last thing we need to do is brush a light layer of egg wash onto our croissants. So we're going to crack 1 egg and whisk that until combined. When brushing your egg wash onto your croissants, be careful not to get the egg wash on the exposed layers of the croissants, as this will prevent rising during the baking process. Be very gentle when brushing your croissants as they are in a super delicate stage. It's time to bake, and we are placing our croissants in a 400-degree Fahrenheit oven for about 5 minutes and then bringing the temperature down to 350 for an additional 10 minutes or until you get a nice golden brown color all over your croissants. To be completely honest with you, I sat in front of my oven the entire 15 minutes just to see if I could tell if my croissants were going to turn out well or not. After the bake, it's almost time for the moment of truth, but let me say that these actually look fantastic for my first time. I will admit they don't look like world-class croissants, but I believe you could sell these behind a bakery counter. We're letting our croissants cool on the wire rack for 10 minutes. After our croissants have cooled down, it's time for the big reveal. Let's hear the live reaction.
Ooh, sounds good. It's not bad. That's actually really good. That's crazy. That looks so good. A little ASMR. Let's see how it sounds. if you guys could hear that. Crispy. Oh my god. I think it's on par with a bakery. Maybe not a world famous bakery, but I think this could beat or compete with some bakery croissants. I'm just saying.
I honestly could not believe how well these turned out. I was actually super worried that I'd messed up somewhere along the journey, whether it was the lamination process or the proofing process. I'm really proud of myself with how these turned out. And lastly, I want to share a couple of tips that I thought of myself from this experience so that you can make delicious croissants at home too. Number 1, make sure your croissant dough is at least half an inch during any folding step. This makes the folding much easier and also makes the last fold easier if your dough is thinner when you make your first fold. Number 2, get a ruler if you don't have one. I actually had the hardest time using a tape measure because it kept sliding around and moving while I was trying to measure. It's also easier to measure the thickness with the ruler rather than a tape measurer. And number 3, croissants take time and there's no way to shortcut time. Great croissants need time to ferment, time to chill, time to rest, and time to proof. If you don't think you have 2 to 3 days to make croissants, then you can't expect the same results. Make sure you give yourself plenty of time for all of these things if you're planning on making them. And before I forget, if you've made it this far into the video, then I just want to give you a huge thank you for sticking around and watching this video. And again, if you like these sort of cooking challenges, then the best way to let me know is to like and comment so that I know to make more. I really enjoyed making this video, even though I was super worried and stressed out the whole time. In the end, everything went really well. Anyway, I'm going to enjoy my mid-afternoon croissant and coffee, so until my next video, I will see you all next time.